but not quite. Supreme Court justices sharply questioned a lower court's decision that has prohibited biotech giant Monsanto from selling genetically engineered alfalfa seeds, possibly paving the way for the company to distribute the seeds for the first time since 2007. The case has been closely watched by environmentalists and agribusiness folks. A federal judge in San Francisco barred the planting of genetically engineered alfalfa nationwide until the government could adequately study the crop's potential impact on organic and conventional varieties. Meanwhile, after feeding hamsters for 2 years over 3 generations, those on the genetically modified diet of modified soy, and especially the group on the maximum soy diet, showed devastating results. By the 3rd generation, most GM soy-fed hamsters lost the ability to have babies. They also suffered slower growth and high mortality rate among the pups. With us is best-selling author and independent filmmaker Jeffrey Smith, a leading spokesperson on the dangers of genetically modified foods. And here is Jeffrey. Jeffrey, these 2 stories. First of all, the court issue here. It looks like the Supreme Court's going to give Monsanto the right to sell these alfalfa seeds.
They may, in fact, do that. What we have here is Monsanto saying, yes, the lower court did acknowledge that the approval of genetically modified alfalfa was illegal. It did not take into consideration the health and environmental impacts. But while the USDA is preparing that, we should not be hurt by being disallowed to sell our illegally approved alfalfa. So that is what's at stake here. They want to allow their alfalfa to be sold while the USDA is doing what it should have done in the first place for the approval process.
And, of course, the lower court, federal judge in San Francisco, says, hey, until we figure out what's going on, you're not going to be able to sell this alfalfa. The Supreme Court now looking into this, and as we just mentioned, they may reverse the lower court's decision. On a broader story, Jeffrey, and one I think even more serious, is this study feeding hamsters for over 2 years links them to sterility and infant mortality. This is a devastating story.
In fact, about 25% of the pups born to the high GM group in the 3rd generation died, compared to only 5% of deaths among the controls. That's a 5-fold increase of death rate. And among those that ate high amounts of GM soy, nearly all of the hamsters were sterile. Only one single female hamster gave birth. She had 16 pups, but about 20% of those died. On top of that, those in the 3rd generation that were eating GM soy had a very high incidence of a very rare defect. They had hair growing in their mouths, showing a defect that it's very rare to see in hamsters at all, but it appears to be much more common for those eating genetically modified soy.
Jeffrey, is genetically modified soy on the market now?
Absolutely. 91% of the soy fields in the United States is genetically engineered not to die when sprayed with Roundup herbicide. They're called Roundup Ready Soy. And this is not the first study that has showed evidence of sterility and infant mortality. In fact, in Russia 5 years ago, they found that when they fed genetically modified soy to female rats, more than half of their babies died within 3 weeks, compared to only 10% death rate among the controls. Again, a 5-fold increase of infant mortality, and the offspring from the GM-fed group could not reproduce. Then they fed male rats genetically modified soy, and the testicles changed from pink to blue. Similarly, mice that were fed GM soy in Italy had changes in their testicles, including damaged young sperm cells, and the embryo offspring of parent mice that were fed GM soy also had changes in the way the DNA functioned. So we're seeing very serious problems linked to GM soy, as well as GM corn, by the Austrian government study, which showed that the more the genetically modified corn was fed to mice, the fewer babies they had and the smaller the babies were.
Aren't we, ironically and sadly, getting a lower sterility rate in human males? Isn't that happening?
Precisely. And lower birth weight babies in the United States, starting around the time GMOs were introduced in the mid-1990s. Even livestock that have been fed GM soy have had problems. For example, in India, the buffalo that eat genetically modified cottonseed cakes most of them get reproductive problems, including sterility, abortions, premature deliveries, prolapsed uteruses, etc. And there's deaths among both the adults and the calves. And a couple of dozen farmers in the Midwest claim that certain varieties of genetically modified corn caused their pigs or cows to become sterile. Some pigs had pseudo-pregnancies. Others gave birth to bags of water.
This was a study done in Russia, I take it, right?
Yes. The one that was done in Russia was done by two different organizations, the Institute of Ecology and Evolution of the Russian Academy of Sciences and the National Association for Gene Security. It was announced on April 15th, and it will be published probably in about 3 months. But I was able to interview the author of the study, the primary author of the study, who revealed the specific numbers of deaths. And not only was there sterility and all these problems in the third generation, but even by the second generation, they showed slower growth and later onset of sexual maturity. And in the 5-year study, the study that was done 5 years ago, they also showed much smaller babies among the GM soy-fed group. So we're seeing a consistency which is also going to be ignored by the biotech industry, because the first scientist who did the research 5 years ago told me that her boss was threatened by his boss, so she was told not to do any more studies on GMOs. In fact, samples were stolen from her laboratory, documents were burnt on her desk. One of her colleagues tried to comfort her by saying maybe the GM soy will solve the overpopulation problem of humans.
Unbelievable. Jeffrey, I would like you to get back to our producers, put together a group of panelists, including yourself. I want to talk more about this story for a full show. This could have devastating impact on the human race, okay?
Absolutely. Will do.
Thank you. Jeffrey's website will be part of our Twitter feed at coasttocoastam.com. County supervisors in California have proposed that toys included in fast food restaurant meals for kids be banned. Officials in the Silicon Valley are convinced that luring kids into eating foods with high sugar, sodium, and fat by using toys will make them overweight and will cause long-term health problems. Studying chili peppers is helping scientists create a new type of painkiller which could stop pain at its source. A team at the University of Texas says a substance which makes chili peppers hot is found in the human body at sites of pain. So now they're thinking, how do we make this and use it as a painkiller? A Volkswagen camper van used during an infamous assisted suicide campaign has been banned being sold on eBay. Dr. Jack Kevorkian's old camper van was put up for sale last week and had a top bid of more than $3,300 before it was withdrawn. The New York Times reports that eBay ruled that the lot was against its policy against items of murderabilia being sold. Ford Motor